Hi, I'm Dr. J. Varma, and welcome to Thermometer. On this channel, I check the temperature of health in the US and around the world and give you expert insights on infectious diseases and public health. Today, I'm doing a special episode with my friend and colleague, Jon Epstein, a veterinarian virologist and disease ecologist who, like me, has spent his career tracking dangerous infectious diseases across all corners of the earth. Thanks, Jon, for joining me today.
Thanks, Jay. I'm really glad we're doing this because I'm particularly fired up about this topic today, and I really can't wait to get into it.
Yeah. So the reason we're talking today, and the reason we're eager for all of you to learn about the news, is that a research facility within the U.S. National Institutes of Health, that's a collaboration with the U.S. military, is being closed down by the Trump administration. Now, this facility, what's known as the Integrated Research Facility in Frederick, Maryland, was told to stop all of its work by April 29th. So basically, it's been closed now as of now. And this is the most important facility that we have in the United States to study Ebola and other dangerous pathogens. It conducts research on what we call high consequence pathogens, those that pose a significant risk to public health. And as a result of this decision, the lab is being told it has to terminate studies on diseases like Lassa fever and a rare mosquito-borne deadly infection called Eastern equine encephalitis that causes disease throughout the United States, throughout particularly the northeastern part of the United States. And what we've learned from the media is that not only were they told to close down, it's being done suddenly. The Department of Homeland Security is padlocking freezers in what's known as biosafety level 4 labs. And basically, this is one of the few labs in the country that's been studying things like Ebola and Lassa fever and Marburg. And now they're basically putting locks on it. So, Jon, give us a little bit background about this lab in particular and why the type of research it does is so important.
Yeah, Jay, it's really it's just tragic, bordering on criminal. And let's explain what biosafety level designations are. That'll help people understand why this is such a big deal. Laboratories are categorized based on the amount of security and safety they have when working with infectious agents. And it's 1 through 4 designation. And when you think about biosafety labs at the 1 and 2 level, think about a high school laboratory or the diagnostic lab at your doctor's office or at a medical center. This is a place where you can do safe experiments. You need running water, some drainage, some disposal, but you're not working with anything particularly dangerous or infectious. And then when you get to biosafety level 3, this is a laboratory that has certain safeguards in it so that infectious agents can't get out of the lab and contaminate environments. Things like negative pressure. So when you're working inside a laboratory, the air is sucked inward. So in case something gets aerosolized or a tube breaks, nothing can get outside the bounds, the walls or the doors of that laboratory. People generally wear personal protective equipment. They sign in and out, and there are security restrictions as to who can enter a BSL-3 lab. So that's where you start to work with infectious agents that may or may not have effective vaccines or therapeutics, could have a higher risk of human infection. And so you really want containment there. And there are many universities that have biosafety level 3 labs, and it takes specific training to work in them. Then you get to the highest level, which is biosafety level 4. And this is reserved for pathogens which are particularly dangerous to people and also livestock. They're agricultural BSL-4 labs. They're for pathogens that don't typically have therapeutics or vaccines. They might be newly discovered, or they might be something we've known about for a long time, but still present a particularly high risk or high consequence should they get into the public. And these are the labs you think about with people, signing in wearing spacesuits. Basically, there's an air hose and you're fully
contagion, right? For
What's
the
that?
average person out there, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, so for the average person, yeah. So you're working with a virus or a bacteria that's so dangerous. You're fully encased in a spacesuit. You have an airline. You shower in, shower out. It's a super restricted laboratory, so only people with authorization and the appropriate training can work in there. And it's a one-way street in terms of samples. Diagnostic samples that go into BSL-4 labs typically will never be removed. They get stored in a freezer, but anything that comes in doesn't come out. So, complete containment there. And that's what we're talking about. The IRF, the Integrated Research Facility, is a government-run, an NIH-run BSL-4 lab. And so why this is so important is that there are viruses out there like Ebola like triple E. I've spent the last 25 years working on also a BSL-4 agent called Nipah virus, and so these are particularly dangerous viruses. I've always partnered with laboratories that have BSL-4 facilities because that's the only way to work with these viruses, to test them, test samples for them. But also drugs and vaccines are created in these laboratories. In order to test the efficacy of drugs, you have to do experiments, sometimes in petri dishes, sometimes in animal models, and that has to be done under this really strict, rigorous containment. And there just aren't that many of these in the world, very few BSL-4 labs, because they're incredibly expensive to build and set up, very expensive to maintain, and it requires real technical expertise. So there are countries around the world that have them. The US is probably one of the ones that has more of them than others, but there's still very few. And so losing one that is government funded, that focuses on really important and dangerous pathogens, is a big loss to public health. And this one in particular is important because this was the lab where HIV was first isolated, where therapeutics and vaccines have been worked on. Ebola has been worked on here. And even though we think of Ebola, as something that only happens in Africa, if you remember in 2014 in that outbreak, we had cases come to America. And so we have to think globally about these things. And these laboratories are so few and far between. There tends to be big international collaborations when it comes to research in these labs. So they're vital for defending ourselves against some of the worst viruses and bacteria that we know about.
Yeah, Jon, I really want to emphasize to the viewers out there how important this type of research is to keep Americans safe. All of the major diseases that people have been worried about and seen, everything from HIV to Ebola to COVID. You read about other emerging diseases around the world and you wonder, wait, do we have something to protect us in case it happens? That has a link to this laboratory. This laboratory has played a vital role. Like, people may not be aware of the fact that we now have a vaccine to prevent Ebola and we have drugs to treat Ebola. And the reason we have those is because of these facilities in Fort Detrick, Maryland, that do the type of research that nobody else around the world invests in, and nobody else around the world has the most rigorous standards for safety as these types of facilities do. And so they are absolutely essential that if we want to protect ourselves against these uncommon but high consequence events, we have to be doing this type of research.
Yeah. And what's particularly frustrating about this is consistent with the government's posture right now about infectious disease research. It is absolutely valid and important to have conversations about doing infectious disease research appropriately and with good biosecurity and taking the most care possible. But it doesn't mean stop doing the research. There's lots of ways we know how to do this very responsibly, and they're starting to remove our ability to do that. And so in a way, they're making us less safe. They're making us less prepared for the next epidemic. And it's a real problem for the US public.
Yeah, and I'm just going to be very blunt here. This is a real combination. The reason this is happening is part of this, strange confluence of people who had legitimate concerns and critiques about COVID, combining with an extreme conspiracy thinking mindset about health and disease. And I want to touch on a few important through lines throughout this, Jon, and get your reaction. The first is the belief that from RFK and many of people in his world, that what causes human illness is invisible environmental toxins and not infectious diseases. Now, the truth is that there are lots of things that cause disease, and some of them are an interaction between the environment and infectious diseases. But you cannot simply dismiss infectious diseases. But they believe that, number one, diseases are not caused, most human illnesses are not caused by infections. They're caused by some type of environmental toxin or pollutant. That's number one. Number two, they believe that there is an industry of big virology, of people who are interested in proving that infectious diseases are a cause of disease because they want to make money off of drugs and vaccines and because they want to control people. So it's a conspiracy thinking that not only are infections unimportant, but that the people who are researching them are trying to make them seem important so they can make money for themselves and that they can control you. And the third is a belief that the people who are doing this research, in addition to being greedy and interested in controlling you are also careless and reckless, and that they do this research in sloppy ways and therefore lead to the leak of viruses around the world. And if we just stop doing this research, we wouldn't get infected with viruses anymore. So those are basically the three main through lines. Infections are not important. Only environmental chemicals are. Number two, anybody working on this research is doing it because they are greedy and they want to control you. And number three, anybody who's doing this research for greed and to control you is doing it because is doing it in ways that are sloppy and dangerous to your health.
Yeah. It's a really dangerous way of thinking, and we have seen throughout history that when we become complacent about infectious disease, it's when we get hit the hardest. And ever since the advent of antibiotics, where we thought, yeah, we got this under control, vaccines, we got this. But the truth is that nature is just always one step ahead of us, and we're going to continue to see outbreaks and epidemics of zoonotic agents, viruses, bacteria, and some of those are going to overwhelm us. COVID was something everyone in the world experienced, and it was a horrific experience. But fortunately, the fatality rate on COVID was only around 1 or 2%. Imagine when a virus emerges that has that level of contagiousness, of infectivity, and a higher death rate. We're going to be on the back foot because we don't have the ability to study it and develop vaccines for it or therapeutics, let alone get ahead of this all and try to prevent them from emerging in the first place. And so it's really short-sighted to say, because there's risk involved in working with viruses or bacteria, we just shouldn't do it at all. Risk is something that is manageable. It is on a sliding scale, and all we ever do is try to minimize risk. You can never eliminate risk in anything you do. You do your best to be as safe and responsible as you can to minimize risk. And then the benefits of doing the research have to outweigh the risk, and they clearly do. And the risks of not doing research at all on infectious disease is to put the entire population of the US and globally really at risk for an epidemic.
Yeah, if you simply close your eyes and don't do this work, you're going to get hit on the other end. And as you mentioned, there is a tremendous culture of safety within these places. Can it be better? Of course, we can always make our world more safe. But there's a reason we do research on nuclear weapons. There's a reason we do research on hazardous chemicals and things, is because only by doing that research can we figure out the ways to protect ourselves from doing it. So you do it in a controlled setting so that out in the wild, you actually have the tools you need to protect yourself. So if you are watching this and you care about these issues as much as Jon and I do, please make noise. Educate your friends. Educate people in your community. Talk to your representatives at the city, the state, the federal level, whether it's your congressperson, your senator. Let them know that you care about infectious disease research and that you don't want this type of thinking to leave us unprotected if something dangerous evolves in the future.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, Jay.
Okay. Thank you all for watching. And if you enjoy this, please please share it with other people in your life who might be interested in this topic, and please subscribe. And we'll see you again soon on another episode of Thermometer.
Take care.